So the title, it's a very short passage, 2 Corinthians 10, 12 through 18. The title is Compare and Contrast. And before I read I want to read a different version that I think really kind of helps kind of get color, the background of this passage. Comparing is not always bad, but definitely not always good. When you're comparing, when I take my RV trips, I use this thing called Gas Buddy. When comparing gas, a good thing, because what a lot of places have done across America, and I put a lot of miles on the odometer in the last couple of summers doing road trips. What they do is on the outskirts, they jack the price up. So I've seen this in, 20 or 30 cities, towns, whatever you want to call them. So, and I'm looking for diesel. So if you see diesel at $4, chances are if you go 10 more miles into the city, sometimes it's as much as 50 cents less. So comparing, if you believe that gas and diesel are a commodity, comparing is good. Comparing bananas, comparing food, it's good. You look at the little, how much am I paying per ounce? It's a good thing. Saves you money. Comparing yourself to a sibling, a friend, another Christian, this is not good. This is the comparison trap, which we're going to talk about. Contrasting, the definition being strikingly different. Years ago, I went to Cuba in the 90s, and the day that I left, it was late May in Chicago, and it was like almost snowing. And the very next day, it was 80 and there was a tornado. That's a contrasting weather pattern. Chicago's famous for it. But contrasting is like, ooh, these two things are very different. And so we want to look at the difference between today, authority. We want to look at authority because authority is good. God gave us authority, but certain people that lump authority onto themselves without any actual background or without anybody actually giving it to them is usually bad. And so I want to read the New Living Translation. This is just 2 Corinthians 10, 12 through 18. I love the way the New Living puts this passage. And there's a little bit of sarcasm. See if you pick it up. A little bit of satire from good old Paul. He says, "Oh, don't worry. I wouldn't dare say that I'm as wonderful as these other men who tell you how important they are, but they are only comparing themselves with each other and measuring themselves by themselves. What foolishness." Lest you think he wasn't being sarcastic, then he goes, "What foolishness." So to put the period at the end of the sentence there. "But we will not boast of authority we do not have. Our goal is to stay within the boundaries of God's plan for us, and this plan includes our working there with you. We are not going too far when we claim authority over you, for we were the first to travel all the way to you with the good news of Christ. Nor do we claim credit for the work someone else has done. Instead, we hope that your faith will grow and that our work among you will be greatly enlarged. Then we will be able to go and preach the good news in other places that are far beyond you, where no one else is working. Then there will be no question about being in someone else's territory. As the scriptures say, the person who wishes to boast should boast only of what the Lord has done. When people boast about themselves, it doesn't count for much. But when the Lord commends someone, that's different." Now, there's a lot in that we can learn in our culture. The cultures are very different on one level. There's a contrast to the culture of a first century church, 4 or 5 decades into existence, into the church, being an actual entity, being the gathering of the body of believers. But there is so much that in the comparison world that you and I are not aware of, and we compare ourselves. We do it a lot without thinking about it. We do it subconsciously. Like I said, comparing is not always bad, but when you're comparing yourself to another person, that is not good. When you say, well, they're doing this, so I should be that far along, or they're really good at this, so I should be good at that. Why can't I sing? I remember thinking, when you're younger, you think you can do just about, I did. I thought I could just do about anything. I thought I had the energy for everything. And you get to your 40s, you're like, I got to aim a little lower. There's not a lot of energy left. There's just, and if you don't work out, if you don't exercise, which I have not been good at consistently, you really are. My doctor told me, he's like, you know, when I got really out of shape was my 40s. He goes, I was working 12, 13-hour days, and I just let myself go, and I've never been able to get that energy back. And so he kind of scared me. I was like, man, I got to get back on that treadmill. I got to do other stuff. But comparing like a singer or a performer or a speaker, I remember watching the Newsboys at our church at Calvary East. I was doing youth at the time at Calvary East, and we had a show with them. And this is before we did a show with them at TCC, but they had come through on a tour stop, and I was talking to Michael Tate at the coffee shop, which at the time I was kind of involved with, and I was like, man, and I've met him a couple times over the years, but I listened to DC Talk, which was his first band in the late 80s. I rode my bike and got a little tape cassette on the Heaven Bound record. And I was like, man, there's something about him. There's Michael, there's Toby, and then there's Kevin. And they're all different. They're very different talents. But when they allowed the talents to not compare themselves, they were insane. Like DC Talk was, I mean, for a long time, one of the top bands, but they are so different. And I like Michael Tate because he's kind of got more of a rock and roll. He's got a Southern rock thing that I like more than the other guys. I'm not as into Toby Mac and Kevin Max's like solo stuff as I am into Michael Tate had a project called Tate, which was more rock, and I liked it. But I was like, man, he entertained. Like he was on like a spinning thing that was up in the air, and I mean he is just as good as they get. And he was a Newsboys frontman at the time. And I was like, man, why can't I be like that? And it's like, you weren't made to do that. I was playing golf with somebody that was at that show, and he was like, man, that guy was just built by God to do that job. And I was like, yeah. And I was thinking like, I should be able to do that. Like if I work hard enough, I should be able to be Michael Tate. And it's like, no, Michael Tate's Michael Tate. God gave him a different world. God gave him different talents. And our talents are different. I mean, he is a 10-talent entertainer for sure. But we do it without knowing it. I wasn't like, on that golf course, I wasn't like, now I'm comparing myself to Michael Tate, and this is a good thing, and this is what's fair, and this is what I should be doing. It was subconscious. And I throw that out there because we do it so much more. This is right when social media started to be an everywhere thing. This is 2012-ish. We do it so much more than we even know. We do it when we look at somebody's pictures from their vacation or their lake house or their car or their new job or their whatever it is. So Paul in verse 12 of 2 Corinthians chapter 10, in the New King James Version says, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. And there is a lot in this. Like I said, I read it out of the New Living because I think it kind of speaks a little more like how we would say it today. It's the same thing. But this is a little bit of a correction. Satire is the idea of sort of making fun of something with the hope that it would change. That's what satire truly is in and of itself. So this is a correction. It's also a re-education. Paul is trying to reorient this church because he isn't there. He was the pastor. He was there a long time for how Paul moved around because he was an evangelist and a church planner. He moved around a ton. He was there for over a year and a half. And so with this church, he's trying to correct but also re-educate and sort of put a bug in their ear. This is a reoccurring theme. It's only a few verses, but the theme is when you yell at somebody or when you're in charge of somebody and you like lay down the hammer, you're like trying to correct people. Maybe you're a coach and you practiced all week. And hopefully the Bears are winning in London right now. I don't know if they are, but hopefully they are. But you practice, and then the team doesn't do it. And you yell at them at halftime. You scream at them. Most coaches do that. I've been yelled at by so many baseball coaches, I can't even remember. But the hope is that they would remember it. The coach team dynamic is such that yelling is sort of appropriate, where it's not appropriate in the church. It's not appropriate for the pastor to scream at people, to yell at people. It's not appropriate to bang the pulpit and like just beat the sheep. It's not appropriate to do that. A lot of guys do it. A lot of people, I think I told you guys this years ago, there was a church I went to in Chicago in the 90s, and there were two churches, and they were mega churches. They were thousands and thousands of people each. One of them was over 10,000 people. And the pastor's approach was so different. One was a conversational, like a teacher born to teach, and the other one was like he just beat the sheep. I mean, every week it was like, I remember people going, man, I love learning so much. I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of harsh. And they're like, yeah, it feels good though to get beat up spiritually, doesn't it? I'm like, I guess I'm supposed to say yes? Yeah, it does. This is great. Well, I didn't last very long there because that's not how I learn. I don't learn by having somebody beat me within an inch of my life mentally. It was brutal. But Paul's sort of trying to throw it out there like, you guys, I'm gonna say some stuff, and hopefully a little light bulbs go on in your head, and then you think it's your idea to come to the conclusion. Because when you yell at people and you're like, here's the idea that's supposed to be in your head, and then you just scream at them, they may know it, but it's not gonna probably trickle down to their heart. They're probably not gonna own it. And so he's trying to do it subtly at the same time with a little tongue-in-cheek or a little nudge or a little satire. Paul does get sarcastic. But sometimes it's dangerous in the church to just say these outright things when people are into a teacher. When someone's like, best teacher in the world is this guy. And you're like, you know what's funny about that guy? I just read something about that guy. Oh man, I hope it's good. Because if you say something bad that you know, if it's true about that person, they will probably not talk to you for a while. They may yell at you for saying such a horrible thing, or they may be discouraged because that person let them down in a way, or had a ministry falling, and it could dissuade them from following. It's one of the reasons Jesus does not set up a leader in this church and say, this is the guy that no matter what, you all have to praise him, you all have to come underneath him, and no matter what he says goes, even if it goes against the things that I've said. Christianity is the one place you will not find that. There is no one authority on this earth. There's only an authority in heaven, and he left us his words. And his Spirit inspired other things to help the church, letters to help the church, letters to straighten out certain issues. So he's saying, what class? We're not in the class of your leaders in your church. They're the ones that compare themselves to each other. They don't compare themselves to God. They don't compare themselves to Christ. They don't compare themselves to godly living. They simply compare themselves to one another. And so when you do that, you can lower the bar as low as you'd like. If you want to be a group of leaders and behind the scenes you're one way and on Sunday morning you're another way, then you're a Pharisee. Jesus' harshest words were for the Pharisees. So comparing and measure themselves to themselves was a nice low bar. It's what we call a human bar. Human beings mess up every day of the week. That's a low bar. No, Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. Now, what if Paul wasn't following Christ? I don't think he would have said that. Follow me as I don't follow Christ. I don't think you're going to find Paul saying that. But these guys were basically doing that. They were telling the church, hey, don't worry about Paul and the Lord and stuff. We have special knowledge. We are the teachers that God has given you. So listen to us. Don't listen to that. Don't listen to any outside. And they didn't have a Bible. They didn't have a Bible app. They didn't have a commentary with a man or a woman who feared God, who wrote down some color to some experience, some life experience stuff like you find in commentaries. One of our big issues is people comparing their life with another life. Social media is the greatest place to find this. TV, mass media, podcasts. You listen to a podcaster and you see 1 hour a week of their life and you're like, man, that's the life. Look at their studio. Look at the palm trees out the back window. look at their beautiful dog, look at their beautiful wife, look at all these things. And you start to go, why don't I have that? The worst thing for human beings to do is start comparing themselves to another human being, because you were made so uniquely. You know, if cars could talk, do you think that a Corvette and a Jeep Wrangler would have a conversation and be like, you know what, your clearance is so low. I wish I didn't have I just look so weird. I'm so tall and gangly and there's so much clearance underneath me. You look so sleek. You can go 150. What happens when you take a Corvette off-road? You make it 15 feet before a boulder takes out all of the undercarriage of your car. They're designed differently. So were you and I. We are unique people with unique DNA, unique fabric, unique giftings. And Paul's trying to get these folks to understand comparison is not good. Comparing yourself to another guy inside the church, another lady inside the church, not good. Verse 13, for we, however, will not boast beyond measure, but within the limits of the sphere which God appointed us, a sphere which especially includes you. This is the idea of your sphere of influence, okay? You have a group of people that you interact with in life. You have a family, you have friends, you have whoever that is, work associates. Maybe you're retired and you have a group of people you get together with and you share. Those people, you can reach those people better than anybody else can reach those people. God gives you a unique relationship and a unique kind of knitting your hearts together with friends. I was playing golf with this group of guys, and this one guy, when you look at the group dynamic, they play all the time, but I play with them, I don't know, a couple times a year. I played with this specific group. And one of these, you ever seen, I don't know if it's Sesame Street, one of these things does not belong. One of these guys does not belong in the group. I'll just say it that way. He's a great guy. But when you consider the other guys, you're like, how did this guy become friends with you guys? The way he talks, the way he smokes, the way all these things. You're like, how do you guys, like, does he like playing with pastors? Does he, like, it was just an odd dynamic. And I was like, man, they really like each other. These guys get along really well. They can speak truth into his life the way no one else can. And that is an awesome thing. And it's not a huge thing. It's just golf, just a game of golf. But that's where guys talk the most, is golf. And it's not much, but it's something. Guys don't usually talk. There's jokes about that. But our issues in this life are, we try to put our best foot forward. We try to, I'm not saying everybody, trying to act like we have it together, try and polish it up for certain people. And Paul goes, look, boast within the line. If you're going to boast as a Christian, boast in where God has taken you. Don't boast in your great talent, how awesome you are, how many friends you have, how big your house is. Like, don't boast outside of measure. Boast within the measure that God has given you, the limits God has given you. God has limited all of us. The only one who wasn't limited is Jesus, because Jesus had a divine nature. But he's saying, look, there's a limit to the sphere of influence that God's going to give you. Don't wish for somebody else's. Don't wish that you were a bigger deal than you are. Bloom where you're planted and love where God has you. Enjoy being content, because guess what? There's not a lot of contentment out there. There's not a lot of people happy with their lot in life out there. And if you come along and you're enjoying Jesus and you're enjoying the fellowship that God has given you with certain people, people go, why are you not negative? Everyone else is. Why don't you drive like people in the Costco parking lot? Why don't you, whatever it is? Being around people who brag about their accomplishments is tiresome. Most people I know don't like it. Many of us have been around people who do. This is where the comparing starts. Sometimes it's spiritual accomplishments. Sometimes it's worldly accomplishments. Sometimes it's a spiritual trip. Well, you need to be doing what we're doing. We go out every Saturday morning and we hand out 5 footlongs to the homeless. Okay, that's awesome. But please don't put that trip on somebody else. Or we go and do this, or we go to Haiti, or we go to Mexico every month. You guys just go once a year. It's not about that. It's about what God enables you to do. The God will allow you the resources. Maybe your resources are small. Maybe they're large. Whatever it is, be available to God. The sphere of influence is defined as the territorial area within or which the political influence or interests of one nation are held. Some of us have a small grouping in our life. Some of us talk to less than 10 or 20 people in a given week because that's where we're at in life. Some of us speak to hundreds in a given week. Wherever God has you, don't boast about your accomplishments. Boast about where God has you, how far he's brought you, where you hope he's going to take you. Verse 14, he says, for we are not overextending ourselves. Oh man, the overextension in America. Everything from credit to saying yes to everybody who asks you for something, to feeling like you have to tip on every single grocery store is asking for money, is asking for roundup, is asking for, hey, we're collecting this and this and this. There's a lot of overextension. There's a lot. You can get into some trouble with credit cards for sure. As though our authority did not extend to you. For it was to you that we came with the gospel of Christ. Without saying, and he's saying, do you guys remember who started the church? I'm not pull rank, because that's a term. When people pull rank on you and they go, oh yeah, you can't, I don't know if you know this, but I'm security for this event or whatever. I've seen this at churches before where security guards don't let you back, and it's like a harvest fest or something, and they won't let you back by, that's where the pastor's getting out of his car. You can't go over there and talk to him. You can't approach him. I've seen it. It's hilarious. What little measure of power goes to certain people's heads. He's like, hey, we're not trying to pull rank. We're not trying to tell you we are in charge of you. We're trying to say that from a spiritual perspective, there's not a whole lot of people steering you right. And we have been tasked with that because God told us to come here. When Paul got saved, he was nowhere near this place. When Paul was on his way to Damascus to persecute Christians, Damascus is in Syria. It's one of the oldest cities in the world. Still there. Damascus it's always a crazy place if you read anything about the news there. But that's where Paul was on. He was on his way on the road to it. It wasn't even there yet. This is literally in southern Greece. Okay, this is a long way away. If you would have told Paul, hey, we want you to start a church, spend a year and a half there, and then a couple of years later, all they're going to do is be a thorn in your side, and they're going to be nightmares. You want to go? No, nobody would want to. Billy Graham once said, if God would have told me everywhere he was going to take me, I don't know that I would have signed up for it at 18. Because it is a lot. He leads us because telling us everything ahead of time is not necessarily a good thing for people. So, yes, they have the authority. Yes, they were somebody who could speak truth to the church. And yet at the same time, they're not overextending themselves by saying that. Guys, we started the church. We're not there for your money. We're not there to tell you what to do Monday through Saturday at the church. We're just simply trying to tell you that you're being steered wrong by some of the false teachers at the church. And here is the reality of the situation. Christ, church, verse 15, we're not boasting of things beyond measure, that is in other men's labors, but having hope that as your faith is increased, we shall be greatly enlarged by you in our to preach the gospel in the regions beyond you and not to boast in another man's sphere of accomplishment. Said something like another man's territory, another church planter's territory. Now in America, there's, 20,000 evangelical churches. There's thousands and thousands of churches. Some are 10 people, some are 10,000 people, some are 80,000 people. But when you start a church and you just plop down right next door to another church, probably not the greatest thing to do, and probably unless God tells you to do it, if there's a good Bible preaching church there, give them a few blocks, And Paul's saying, look, we are being used, and we probably will be in the area around you and beyond, but we don't have animosity. We don't want to have another issue where, the Corinthians aren't talking to Paul again. We don't want to have that because there's authority issues in this church. There are perspectives, there are levels, if you will. Like there's jobs inside the church, in a big church. And there's assistants, and then there's sometimes a pastor that oversees all that, what you might call a bishop. And it's good to have accountability, but it's not like, oh, I just messed up, I must go confess my sins to the Pope of Arizona. We don't do that. And that's not what he's saying. There are some who probably go, well, see, that's why it's good to have a pope. That's why it's good to have a whatever, so he can strike people down. No, that's not it. We need hearts that are soft enough to hear the truth. We need, if somebody comes to you the right way and goes, hey, I noticed something, like this just seems a little like maybe we're not on the same page here. I heard this or whatever. Can you help me straighten this out? Bring an issue to a person that you have an issue with. The proper perspective here, many in the church don't have it. I mean, there's a lot in what you would call the extended church. People who, quote, go to church. They go to church someplace. Maybe the church doesn't open the Bible. Maybe they don't even preach anymore. Maybe they have moved away from all that. Maybe they're just spiritual. Maybe they're just enlightened. I've seen all kinds in this town. But the false teachers in this church were interested in expanding their influence. They were interested in making themselves a bigger deal. They were interested in elevating themselves to a place where they were sort of untouchable, sort of unaccountable, sort of, hey, you can't talk to them. They're the leaders. Whatever what they say goes. I know, but we're kind of far off from the gospel. Take it up with those guys. Well, and you take it up with them and they won't have a meeting with you. They won't return your calls. They won't return your texts, your emails, hey, we want to have a meeting. Sorry, we're not doing that. I've seen that. I've seen that in the last few years with some churches that are Bible preaching churches, not around here, but one that I used to be a part of, where the pastor was like, hey, I'm not having a meeting with you. And it was so bad that he had to be fired through a press release being leaked. It was that bad because he wouldn't listen to the elders in the church that God had put there. God had called Paul as a church planter. He had given Paul a specific authority, a specific apostolic authority. That was a real thing. The original apostles. There are not original apostles living today. I know that sometimes you'll see a guy that says, Apostle Frank, Apostle Jim, Apostle Dan. I don't know what that means to them. I know what the word means. The word means to be sent out or sent one. God sends many people out to do many different things. The gift of apostleship is maybe you're an evangelist. Maybe you're somebody who goes out and starts churches. Awesome. That's great. You're not an original apostle. They've been gone a little while. Jesus resurrected a long time ago. They're not still here. That doesn't mean the gifts aren't here. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some kind of an authority in the church of some kind. But Paul was a very different guy. Paul started a lot of churches, and almost nobody looks at Paul's letters now and goes, yeah, there was no authority behind him. There was no power behind him. There was tons of power behind him. There was tons of miraculous that was around Paul. If you read Acts, you know this. Read the book of Acts if you don't think that. But God had called him. And sometimes when you have to say things a harsh way, especially in a letter, and sometimes you have to sort of let people come to that conclusion on their own. Hey, guess what? Something occurred to us. These guys aren't really in line with the gospel. Oh, you don't say. Fantastic. I'm glad you came up with that. Even though Paul's been laying it on pretty thick with satire and the rest of it. But sometimes you have to delicately explain things so that people can come to this conclusion, because the human ego is very fragile, as you guys know. Not bragging in another's accomplishment. Paul wouldn't do this. Paul didn't do this. He only bragged in the amount of ability God gave him. There are certain people who cannot handle success. There are certain people, when you let them teach for the first time, they change. I've seen it a few times in my life. It's not good. Paul talks about that in another letter. But with worldly success or spiritual success, it puffs them up. There's TV shows about this. Some young person becomes a big deal in a company at a very early age or a very young age, and it puffs them up, and people are like, ooh, that wasn't a good thing to promote such a young person into that role. It takes time. Paul wasn't a young man when God gave him this assignment. And lastly, verse 17, but he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. That's Jeremiah 9:24. For he who commends himself is approved, but whom the Lord commends. For not he who commends himself is approved, but the one the Lord commends. Don't let your commendation, don't let your degree, don't let your whatever it is, whatever your position is, whatever the certificate on the wall says about you, don't let the world give that to you. Let the Lord humble yourself, and he's going to promote you. That's the translation of today. Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will promote you. He will take you to where you're supposed to go. You don't have to worry about that. But all of the accomplishments, all of the people that get saved, all of the church growth, all of the genuine stuff, the stuff that's real, the Spirit of God gets the credit for that. No man or no woman gets the credit for that. Sometimes they take it, but they shouldn't take it. Sometimes people go, oh man, I couldn't have ever done it without you. Well, okay, God used me, thanks. But you think the power was in me? The power wasn't in me. Just because somebody has a gift, that's not their power. It's like somebody who gets handed a Corvette. Wow, you're amazingly successful. Yeah, my dad gave it to me. That's not success. That's somebody handing you a gift. That is what we have. We have spiritual giftings. God hands those to us. Hopefully we use them for his glory. But there's a limit to authority, and there's a spiritual authority that the Spirit of God has established through the letters to the church. But at the same time, comparing yourself to another Christian, comparing yourself to whoever it is, does not matter. I've never seen it be a good thing. Comparing, like when you're a dad and this one's not as good as this one at this, a horrible thing to say out loud. Never, you want to give a kid a complex? Be like, wow, I can't believe you're not as fast as your sister. The worst thing in the world you could do, because they're as different as DNA is. So we're way over on time, but I just want to say this in closing. Think about, do you compare? Do you compare whether it's spiritual or to a neighbor or to whatever else, somebody at work? Do you compare yourself? Do you like maybe you say, oh no, I don't do that. I stopped doing that long ago. Think about, like when you're alone, think about where your thoughts go. Do you think about how else somebody has it? Oh, they have it so much better than me. Guys, I do this a lot. I still do it to this day. I catch myself. Yeah, that's not good. It's not a good standard to have. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for, once again, the food we're about to have. We thank you for the police. I pray that they'd be encouraged. I pray that they would see a light in this church as they come and interact with people in their city that they serve. I pray that, God, you just bless our fellowship, bless this food. We thank you, God, for those that are struggling right now, for those that are just maybe far away from you, Lord, that they would draw close, that you would encourage them, Lord. And God, that you would let us truly understand that the standard has already been met by your Son, and that we are just along for the ride to join him and to let him live his life through us. In Jesus' name, amen.